seems that you'll have some of the same concerns that you always have with your English language learners, even with this topic. We can start by addressing vocabulary instruction. And what I suggest that you do in this area would be a strategy of decoding words using cognates. And this is going to help the students that speak languages that are of a romantic nature, for example, Spanish, French, Italian, because Jim Cummings categorizes words into two categories. And one is low-frequency words and high-frequency words. And low-frequency words are the words that you teach typically in your classroom. They are very technical. The definition in itself might be technical, and they're multisyllabic, and they're not words that we hear on an everyday basis. High-frequency words are those words that we expect to hear and do use on a regular basis. And what Jim Cummings tells us is that because a lot of those low-frequency words, like the words that you teach in your field, tend to come from a Greco-Latin background, then students that have a Romance language background are going to be able to decipher those words much more easily than a student that would not have that knowledge. However, you might find that they don't do that on their own, and it was much to my surprise as well as a teacher that I realized that my students, even those that had a strong Spanish background, were not decoding the words and not finding the cognates on their own. And so I had to deliberately teach them to do that and model that for them. And once you teach them and you model them and you have them practice it, then it becomes second nature, and they'll start looking for those cognates and using their native language to try to decipher the word. And they'll be much more effective in understanding the words. I can give you a simple example. For example, the word infirm is a word that we don't customarily hear. We don't usually hear students saying, I was infirm and therefore I could not come to class yesterday, or a parent sending us a note, for an excused absence due to their child being infirm. But however, that cognate is enfermo in Spanish, which is a word that even a toddler would know either expressively or receptively at a very young age. Another of my favorite words is quotidian, and in Spanish the word is cotidiano. And that may not be a word that most Spanish speakers would have expressively, but they would know it receptively at least, because they would hear it in the news or they'd hear their parents say it. And so they would know the meaning of it. So even if it's not part of their natural vocabulary, they still would know the meaning of it. They still would be able to decipher the word because the spelling is very similar as well. And so that gives them an advantage. So if you would just model a little bit of the looking for those cognates and decoding the words, that might help your students with some of the vocabulary that you're presenting. Here Sandra models how to decode words using cognates. The Anglo-Saxon lexicon has words that are predominantly used in everyday conversation, and we call these high-frequency words, while the Greco-Latin lexicon has become the language of literacy and more formal functioning. We know these to be low-frequency words. Low-frequency words are commonly taught in academic settings. Therefore, it makes sense to use the knowledge of cognates to decipher low-frequency words. And students that have as their first language a Romance language, such as Spanish, have an inherent advantage in being able to decipher words from the Greco-Latin derivation. But it is important that we teach them to have cognate awareness. Otherwise, they will not apply this skill on their own.
But what I would like to introduce to you guys is some Spanish terms, okay? Spanish cognates. How many of y'all are familiar with the term cognate? How many of y'all in here take Spanish? Okay, Jeannie, can you tell me what a cognate is?
A cognate is a word in two different languages that mean the same thing and they sound and look similar.
Okay, they're spelled basically the same way. Okay, a cognate sounds almost exactly the same, and it means almost the same thing. Now, did y'all know that in Spanish, 30 to 40% of Spanish words are cognates to the English language? Did y'all know that? I just learned that. Okay, it's pretty cool. I didn't know that. I didn't realize there was that many words. Okay, in Chinese, you're not going to have that many. But in the Spanish language, 30 to 40% of those terms match the English term. So we're going to practice some of that here on this slide with the vocabulary that we're going to have today. And our first one is extension. Okay, extension is spelled in the English EXTENSION, and in the Spanish it is spelled EX, let me make sure I spell it correctly. I believe it is spelled exactly the same. It is EXTENSION, but it has an accent over the O. Okay? Now, in English, it means straightening of a body part. Okay, Megan. Okay, the Spanish cognate for extension is extensión. So it looks the same, it's spelled basically the same. What do you think, if you had to guess, what do you think it would mean in Spanish?
To make something longer or to stretch something out.
Okay, so basically it means about the same thing. You're straightening this body part out. You're making it longer, you're making it more elastic. Okay, another term that we could look at would be hyperextension. Okay, in English it's spelled HYPEREXTENSION. Now the Spanish cognate for this is spelled HIPEREXTENSION, and there's no accent on the hyper part, but again there would be an accent over the O. And how you pronounce hyper in Spanish? Is there anybody in here that knows? Anybody in here know how you would say it? It's hyperextensión. So if we know what extension means, so what does extension mean in English? Straightening the body part. So what do you think hyper extension? We've had hyper in our medical terminology.
High amount of straightening,
Matt?
like a lot amount of it.
Right, a high amount. Okay, a greater amount. It's above. Okay, normal. If I take my arm, this is extension right here. Okay, this is what extension looks like. Okay, hyperextension would be pulling it actually behind. Okay, it's above the normal range. Okay, so this would be extension. This is hyperextension. Yes, Rebecca.
I had to go to physical therapy last year for my knee, and they checked out my range of motion on my other knee, and it was like 15 degrees higher than normal.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they know why that was?
They said that I'm just probably more flexible than an average person.
Oh yeah, my shoulder said that.
There's a special machine. Do you know what it's called? Do you remember from when they measured it? Physical therapy. It's called a goniometer, and it actually measures the range of and there's like certain levels that's considered within a normal range, and that's how they determine how much of an injury you have or how much they need to work on your flexibility. Okay, so if hyperextension means excessive straightening of a body part, let's look at some other words. Okay, Justin, what do you think hyperactive means?
I think it means they're more active than normal, like they're very, very active.
Okay, have y'all ever known people that were hyperactive? Okay, they have a hard time sitting still, they're constantly having to move, constantly moving around. ADD, that's kind of a medical term for it, for hyperactive. Very good. Okay, what about hypersensitive? That's another example. What is if somebody's hypersensitive? What's the issue there? They're overly sensitive. Okay, good. They get their feelings hurt a lot. Okay, they kind of. Have you ever heard they wear their feelings on their sleeve? You ever heard that term? Wear their heart on their sleeve. That's good. Gina.
Also, like, isn't hypersensitive, like, I have autistic cousins, and, like, a lot of autistic kids, their senses, like, their vision and, like, their touch and their hearing and stuff is, like, either hypersensitive or hyposensitive, so, like, bright lights really bother them, or really loud noises are really painful for them or things, so.
That's a real good example of hypersensitive. I know some people, when I was growing up, they would have kids who, if their socks were not a certain way, and that wasn't an issue I ever had with my children, but if some people had socks, they couldn't have like the certain little seam, and they had to get seamless socks because they're kids. It would just drive them crazy. So that would be another example of hypersensitivity. Yeah, just real sensitive to the way things fit and stuff like that. Kind of like OCD. Yeah, just real sensitive. Things have to be a certain way. That would be an example of a hypersensitive person. Okay, good. Okay, another term, English term is rotation. Okay, spelled rotation. And it means okay, it's movement of a body part around its own axis. An example of that would be turning your head from side to side like this. Okay, that's rotation. Okay, the Spanish cognate is rotación. 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 Okay, it is spelled rotación with the accent on top of the O. So, Matt, if the English is spelled like this, and this is a definition, what do you think would be the Spanish version of that?
Like to turn or take turns to something.
Okay, it's turning. Okay, now axis. Does anybody have a definition for axis? Gina?
It's the point around which something revolves.
Right. Okay, it's a straight line. It can be defined as a straight line about which a body or object rotates. Okay, remember on our skeleton, our head, skulls. Okay, our skeleton, his little head. Okay, it pivots right on top of, y'all remember what these are called from when we did our skeleton? Y'all remember what these vertebrae are called?
Cervical.
Cervical. Okay, the skull pivots right on top. So that would be the act of rotation on the skeleton.
The steps that Sandra took for using this strategy are: 1. She read the unfamiliar word in English. 2nd, she noted the spelling of the word. 3rd, she helped the students think of a word that looked or sounded like the English word, a cognate in their primary language. And 4th, she asked the students to think about what the cognate means in their primary language. She then asked them to guess the meaning of the unfamiliar word in English. Please note that when teaching vocabulary and assessing vocabulary, it is important for the teacher to be clear on what constitutes knowledge of a vocabulary word.